I never thought I'd be standing on my own porch, letting two men in fake uniforms put cuffs on me, while the HOA president grinned like she just won a war. That moment, humiliating on the surface, wasn't really about my lawn or my trash cans. It was about patience, power, and the kind of people who mistake paper and threats for real authority. But to understand how it came to this, you have to go back to the beginning. I had just moved into my new home. The paint was still fresh. The smell of possibility still hung in the air. Boxes were stacked like little cardboard mountains in every room, each one labeled in my late wife's careful handwriting. She used to joke that someday I'd retire surrounded by paperwork and commendations, so she wrote old files, burn on the one full of my service awards and case notes. 20 years on the force, 15 in SWAT, 5 as chief of police. This house wasn't just shelter. It was supposed to be my reward. The neighborhood looked like a postcard. Towering oaks lined the streets, lawns perfectly trimmed, families waving as they walked dogs or pushed strollers. It was the sort of place where birds replaced sirens in the mornings, and for the first time in years I thought I might find peace. My grandfather used to say, "A man's home is his castle, but the best castles have quiet neighbors." I believed I had found mine. For 3 weeks, life was exactly as I hoped. A neighbor across the street, Duke, waved every morning, usually with a leaf blower in hand. A young family welcomed me with a plate of cookies. I set up my workshop in the garage and let myself imagine what normal might feel like again. Nights were quiet. I slept deeply, something I hadn't done in decades. And then it arrived. Tucked beneath the wiper blade of my truck was a piece of paper, bright red, printed in angry block letters. Violation notice. According to the words on the page, my lawn was 1/4 of an inch too high. The fine, $50. Signed by someone named Karen Van Fleet, president of the Oak Street Homeowners Association. I looked at my lawn. It was neat, green, and no different than my neighbor's. This wasn't about grass. This was about control. The kind of control small people crave when handed even the illusion of power. My gut tightened with the familiar weight of duty. I'd seen this before, bullies dressing up their ego as authority. I folded the notice and slipped it into my pocket. I should have known better than to ignore it. But I wanted to pretend I was just a man in a new house, not a cop who could already smell the rot behind the curtain. The next morning there were 2 notices. One for the lawn again, another for my trash can. Apparently it was visible from the street for 3 hours past the approved pickup time. $75 more. My total now stood at $125. The language was escalating too. Words like immediate compliance and further action littered the page. Intimidation dressed up as procedure. Fake power designed to frighten those who didn't know better. My grandfather would have called her a pocket tyrant. Small in stature, but loud enough to make herself seem big. And he would have told me to deal with her quickly, before the weed overtook the garden. That's when I saw her. A woman walking a tiny yapping dog paused at the edge of my yard. Clipboard in hand, sharp eyes scanning my house. Her features were severe, her haircut sharp enough to level a picture frame. When our eyes met, she didn't smile. She gave me a look of smug ownership, as if she ruled the street and I was just another subject in her kingdom. The silence I bought this house for was gone, replaced by the feeling of occupation. A test had been given, and I already knew my answer. The next day, I drove downtown, not to my office at the department, but to the county clerk's building, where the air smelled of old paper and bureaucracy. Facts live there, and facts don't bend to bluster. At the public records counter, I asked for the incorporation documents of the Oak Street Homeowners Association. The clerk searched. Nothing. Not under that name. Not under any variation. In fact, the county had no record of any HOA for the subdivision at all. No covenants, no bylaws, nothing filed ever. The neighborhood had been zoned single-family residential back in the 70s, and it stayed that way, which meant one thing: the Oak Street HOA didn't exist. The papers I'd been receiving weren't legal notices. They were props. Forgeries dressed up to scare my neighbors into paying fines that had no basis in law. Fraud, extortion, conspiracy, call it what you like. What it was not was real. I paid for certified letters stating as much, sealed and notarized. They felt heavy in my hands, not because of the paper, but because of what they represented, truth weaponized. But I didn't go straight to Karen's house. I didn't want to wave it in her face and end the game too soon. No, if you scare a wolf from the sheep once, it just comes back later, hungrier. You don't chase it, you cage it. So I went home, sat at my kitchen table and laid out my own weapons. Discrete cameras, high-fidelity microphones, an alert ring that would stream everything directly to my lieutenant's phone at the department. My quiet retreat was no longer just a home. It was a tactical observation post. Because Karen Van Fleet thought she was in control. She thought her red notices and fake bylaws gave her authority. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just a homeowner. I was the chief of police. And I was about to let her dig her own grave. Sat heavy in my passenger seat on the drive home. A notarized document that confirmed what I already knew. There was no HOA on Oak Street. Never had been. Karen Van Fleet wasn't a president. She was a fraud. And those red notices were nothing more than theater, staged to scare good people into handing over their money. I could have ended it right then. Walked across the street, shoved the letter into her clipboard, and told her the game was over. But I knew people like her. Strip away the mask and they don't stop. They just find a new one. They move to another neighborhood, another set of victims, and start over. Bullies don't quit when you tell them to, they quit when you put them in a cage. So I decided to let her keep playing. Let her dig deeper. Give her rope enough to hang herself. That evening, my kitchen table transformed from the heart of a quiet home into the staging ground of an operation. I unpacked boxes that hadn't seen daylight since my sweat days. Compact surveillance cameras, wireless feeds, a high-fidelity microphone hidden inside a shirt button. And the most important piece. A black band I wore on my finger, disguised as a simple ring. 2 taps on the side would send an encrypted alert to my lieutenant, streaming live video and audio from my house. My panic button. It was strange, setting these things up in a place I'd bought for peace. But as I told myself then, this wasn't about me. It was about every neighbor she'd ever shaken down, every homeowner who'd paid quietly just to avoid the harassment. This wasn't just defense. This was a trap. By nightfall, my house was rigged. Cameras covering every angle, microphones catching every whisper. A system that recorded and backed up everything in real time. Outside, my allies were in place too. Duke across the street, leaf blower at the ready, phone charged. The young family next door, nervous but willing to film from their window. Boone, my most reliable officer, on standby with an unmarked car. Danny Reyes, my lieutenant, prepared to hit record the moment my signal went out. The chessboard was set. Now it was only a matter of time before Karen made her move. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, another notice appeared on my door. Bright red, bold print. This one claiming failure to comply. The fine had ballooned to $500. The language was darker now. Lien to be placed on property. Legal action pending. All lies. But lies have power if you don't know better. That was her weapon, fear of the unknown. I crumpled it and tossed it in the trash. My trap was ready. All I needed was for her to step inside it. The following day dawned gray and heavy. I put on the shirt with the hidden microphone. Slipped the ring onto my finger. Made coffee. Sat in my living room and waited. At 10 o'clock sharp, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. Oversized, tinted windows, no markings. The kind of vehicle people buy when they want to look dangerous. Out stepped 2 men in navy uniforms. From a distance, they looked official. Silver shields, shoulder patches, rental duty belts. But my eyes caught the flaws immediately. Bad crests, mismatched numbers, movements that didn't have the practiced economy of real officers. These weren't cops. They were actors in costume. And then she stepped out. Karen Van Fleet. Clipboard in hand like a scepter, blazer crisp, face twisted with satisfaction. She pointed at my front door like a queen ordering her guards forward. They pounded on the door. Not a knock, but a show of force. I took a slow breath, smoothed my shirt, and opened it. There they were. Two impostors in surplus store uniforms holding a fake warrant. At the top, it bore the name of a judge who had retired 5 years ago. The charge, criminal defiance of community bylaws. Legal gibberish that doesn't exist anywhere in the statutes. But they didn't know I knew that. I played the part of the concerned citizen. Calm. Neutral. Hands up, no fight. And as they slapped on cheap, too tight handcuffs, I smiled directly at Karen. A small smile. Enough to rattle her. Enough to say without words, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Because now I wasn't just holding paper proof of her fraud. I had something far more powerful. Evidence. Live, recorded, undeniable evidence of felony impersonation, extortion, and kidnapping. The goons tugged me down the walkway, staging a perp walk for the whole neighborhood. Exactly what Karen wanted. But the neighbors weren't just watching, they were filming. Every angle, every second. My microphone button caught every word. My cameras streamed live to Danny. And as I stumbled once, pressing my cuffed hands briefly against the rear bumper of the SUV, I slipped a GPS tracker into place. One more layer to the net closing around them. The back door slammed shut behind me. The SUV pulled away from the curb. And in that moment, Karen Van Fleet believed she had won. She believed she had silenced her defiant neighbor. She believed she ruled Oak Street without challenge. What she didn't realize was that she had just handed me her entire operation on a silver platter. The trap was sprung. And the next move was mine. I sat cuffed in the back seat, arms pinned behind me, my thumb resting quietly against the ring on my finger. 2 taps had already sent the signal. Somewhere across the city, Lieutenant Danny Reyes had phones buzzing, live feed streaming, and a case file opening in real time. I wasn't just a passenger in a black SUV. I was the bait in a trap carefully laid and now fully in motion. The 2 impostors in the front seats chuckled as though they had already won. The driver gripped the wheel with false confidence, weaving through traffic, one hand occasionally lifting a burner phone to his mouth. His voice was low, almost casual. "Yeah, we got him. Folded like a cheap suit. Taking him to the spot now." The passenger turned to look at me. His face was narrow, rat-like, with a grin that was equal parts smugness and insecurity. He wanted me to flinch. He wanted to see fear in my eyes. But silence unnerves people like him. And so I stared back with the same calm look I used to give armed suspects in barricaded houses. A look that said, "I've seen worse than you and I'm still here." He scoffed and turned around, muttering to the driver about how Karen was going to be pleased. They spoke of her like she was a boss, not a neighborhood busybody. $50 here, $75 there, and now $500 for me. They spoke about the money as if it were real wages, not extorted from frightened neighbors. But their bravado was paper thin. Every second that ticked by, my microphone button recorded their voices, my cameras fed their images to Danny, and the GPS tracker under the bumper updated their location to the second. They thought they were in control. They had no idea they were the ones being hunted. The SUV veered out of the neighborhood, past strip malls and fast food joints, heading toward the industrial park on the outskirts of town. Wide roads, warehouses, long stretches of empty space. Perfect for intimidation and perfect for a takedown. I leaned back against the seat and let the calm settle in. I'd felt it before in the back of a SWAT van before a breach. The quiet before a storm. Every detail mattered. My breathing steady. My ears tuned to every sound. My muscles relaxed but ready. The driver's knuckles white on the steering wheel. The passenger fidgeting with the grip of a fake badge at his hip. The rhythm of the tires on the road. And then, a subtle vibration through the sole of my shoe. Haptic feedback from a tiny receiver. Danny's signal. Units were in place. The net was closing. Ahead of us, a construction van pulled out onto the road, moving slowly. The driver muttered a curse and downshifted, forced to brake. Behind us, a black sedan slid into position. To the left, a dark pickup truck. Boone. Calm, steady Boone. His eyes forward, his face unreadable. The driver frowned, irritation flashing across his face. He had no idea the chessboard had shifted, No idea that every lane was blocked, every exit sealed. Then it happened. The construction van slammed on its brakes. The driver of the SUV stomped his pedal in panic. Tires screeched. We lurched forward, my chest slamming against the belt. Behind us, the black sedan closed the gap tight. To the left, Boone's truck swerved, boxing us in. In the span of 3 seconds, the SUV was trapped. Doors burst open around us. Shadows unfolded into armed officers in tactical gear, moving with the fluid, precise grace of years of training. Their voices erupted all at once, a storm of overlapping commands. Police, show me your hands. Hands where I can see them. The driver froze, his tough act collapsing under the weight of real authority. His hands trembled as he lifted them onto the dashboard. The passenger's face drained of color, eyes darting like a cornered animal. The reality was too big for him to process. The back door yanked open. An officer I recognized from the academy aimed his weapon steady, eyes sharp. "Chief, you okay, sir?" I nodded. Calm. Certain. "Get me out of these things." The fake cuffs clicked open and fell away. I rubbed circulation back into my wrists, then stepped out of the SUV into the cold air of a controlled felony stop. The scene around me was electric. My officers moving with purpose, suspects dragged from the vehicle, pressed against the hood, their fake authority stripped away in seconds. Boone held up one of their weapons, a convincing airsoft pistol in one hand, and from under the driver's seat, something worse. A 9mm handgun, its serial numbers filed off. My gut tightened. Their game had just escalated into federal territory. The passenger sobbed, mumbling excuses. The driver stayed silent, smart enough to know it was too late. Their reign of intimidation had ended in a parking lot, their fake badges now evidence bags. I stood there, calm in the chaos, no longer the victim in handcuffs, not the man being paraded in front of neighbors. I was once again the chief of police, and this was my scene. But this wasn't finished. Karen Van Fleet wasn't in the back of a patrol car yet. She was still out there, still clutching her clipboard, still believing she was untouchable. The pawns were captured. Now it was time to take the queen. The industrial park looked like a ghost town. Warehouses stretched in every direction, their corrugated walls muted in the gray light. But in one corner, life surged. Flashing lights, tactical gear, crime scene tape unfurling in the breeze. The SUV was sealed off, officers circling it like surgeons around an open wound. The impostors sat in separate patrol cars now, their swagger gone, their faces pale and drawn. Their cheap uniforms were bagged as evidence, their fake badges tagged and photographed. What had begun as a show of intimidation had ended in sobbing denials and trembling hands. But I wasn't interested in their tears. Not yet. The real prize was the vehicle itself. Inside the glove compartment, my team found a stack of the same red violation notices I had been receiving. Blank spaces for the address, the infraction, and the fine amount. All identical, all pre-printed, waiting to be filled in and slid under a windshield wiper. It was their script, their weapon of choice. Beneath the stack was a binder, crude maps of neighborhoods marked with circles and notations. My own house circled in red. Other houses too, targets carefully chosen, no doubt for families who looked new, vulnerable, or unaware of their rights. It was a predator's playbook. Under the back seat, they found a lockbox. A pry bar popped it open to reveal a sickening little treasure. Bundles of cash, each wrapped with rubber bands, each topped with sticky notes bearing addresses. Fear turned into receipts. Boone counted quickly. Over $5,000 in small bills, squeezed from homeowners desperate for peace. But the most important discovery was small, unremarkable, and tucked into the driver's side pocket. A prepaid burner phone. Password protected, but that was a short obstacle. Danny filed the warrant, the lab cracked it, and within minutes the data poured out. Texts, calls, timestamps. The last call placed before they pulled up to my house? A contact labeled K-Boss. Cross-reference confirmed it. The number belonged to Karen Van Fleet. And a message followed, timestamped just 20 minutes earlier. Is it done? Is the trash taken out? My jaw tightened at the phrasing. That wasn't the language of petty fines and bylaws. That was the language of someone who believed she was running an organization. A boss speaking in code to her foot soldiers. We now had impersonation, kidnapping, extortion, firearm violations, and a digital trail linking it all directly to Karen. The net was tightening, but I knew from experience that people like her don't keep everything at home. They stash evidence elsewhere, believing they're untouchable. Boone confirmed it minutes later. In the SUV's visor, he found a set of keys on a brass ring. One bore the stamp of a local storage company, Unit 218, rented to an LLC tied to Karen Van Fleet. We drove there under quiet cover, convoying unmarked cars through side streets until the rows of orange and blue storage units stretched before us. It was the perfect place to hide what she didn't want neighbors to see. The key slid in smoothly, the padlock snipped under warrant. The door rolled up with a groan, releasing a stale wave of ink and paper. And what stood before us wasn't storage at all. It was a workshop. Filing cabinets lined one wall, their drawers labeled with neighborhood names. Oak Street, Willow Creek, Maple Lane. Each drawer neatly filled with files. Property records, violation notices, payment records. My own folder was right in the front, complete with copies of every fine she'd sent me and notes about when I'd moved in. Other files were worse. Families who had moved away after harassment. Elderly residents who had paid thousands over years of intimidation. Notes in Karen's handwriting marked "soft target" beside their names. On another wall, boxes of red paper, envelopes, and ink cartridges. And at the center, a high-end commercial printer, humming faintly as though it had been recently used. This wasn't an office of a community board. This was a forgery factory. The deeper we dug, the darker it became. Forged county seals, fake lien notices, even templates for fabricated court orders, complete with photocopied signatures of long-retired judges. Her arrogance was staggering, keeping her empire cataloged and organized, confident no one would ever look. But now we were looking, and the money trail was just as damning. Bank records obtained under warrant showed one account with less than $100, another covering her day-to-day expenses. But the third, registered under one of her shell LLCs, contained over $250,000, all tied to deposits matching the fraudulent fines. It wasn't just fraud anymore. It wasn't just intimidation. It was racketeering, a criminal enterprise sprawling across multiple neighborhoods. Danny's voice was tight with anger as she held up a file from Willow Creek. An 80-year-old widow had been forced to sell her home after non-compliance fees drained her savings. Karen had marked her too as a soft target. That was the moment I stopped seeing this as simply an HOA scam. This was predation. This was cruelty disguised as paperwork. And it was about to end. We sealed the unit, tagged every box, photographed every page. The evidence was airtight. All that remained was the final piece. Karen herself. And by sheer arrogance or sheer obsession, she made it easy. From the burner phone's texts, we learned she had scheduled a board meeting that night, held in her garage, with her officers and board members. A throne room in miniature, where she could preside as queen of her false kingdom. That was where we would take her. Not quietly, not in the shadows, but in front of her entire court. The pawns had been stripped away, the castle breached, and tonight the queen would fall. The storage unit closed with a heavy clang, sealing away the paper empire Karen had built. Inside those filing cabinets was everything: victims, payments, forged documents, even her profits neatly tied to shell corporations. It was a criminal enterprise dressed up as neighborhood order. But as damning as the evidence was, it wasn't enough to end it with paperwork alone. Karen Van Fleet needed to be taken down in her element. Not in an office, not in court, but in the very garage where she had crowned herself queen. That chance came sooner than expected. The burner phone revealed a message chain, outlining her plans for a board meeting that very night. She had gathered her circle. 2 frightened neighbors pressed into service, her hired goons who were now in custody, and herself presiding at the head of the table. It was theater, pure and simple, a delusion of power enacted in folding chairs under fluorescent light. We staged quietly as the sun sank behind the oaks on Oak Street. Unmarked cars parked at either end of the block. Officers slipped into shadows, their shapes blending with the trees. Radios whispered low updates. The neighborhood looked peaceful from the outside, porch lights flickering on, families finishing dinner. But in reality, the entire block was under watch. From Duke's backyard, we had a clear view of Karen's garage. The door was closed, but light spilled from the gaps at the edges. Voices carried faintly into the night, muffled but sharp. Through a directional microphone, her tone cut through. Angry, scolding, convinced of her authority. "Unacceptable," she barked. "He should have been a simple matter. Now he's vanished, and my people have disappeared. This reflects poorly on our organization." Her organization. That single word revealed her delusion. She believed her scam was more than fraud. She believed she was running a government, a court, a power larger than law. But the law was already at her door. Danny's voice crackled in my earpiece. "All units in place, Chief. The house is surrounded. Ready on your signal." I glanced at my team. Boone, steady as always, checked his vest straps. Two younger officers beside him shifted in nervous anticipation, their eyes sharp and ready. My hand rested on the garage side door's knob, heart beating with the calm rhythm I had carried into hundreds of high-risk entries. I listened once more. Karen's voice rose, berating the two neighbors seated as her board. She demanded loyalty, demanded obedience, threatened consequences if they faltered. Her power was slipping, and she was desperate to claw it back. That was the moment. I nodded once. The signal was given. The door swung wide as we surged inside. The garage transformed from a stage of her authority into a scene of sudden chaos. Officers poured in, commands sharp and overlapping. "Police, don't move. Hands where we can see them." For a split second, everyone froze. Karen stood at her makeshift podium, clipboard raised like a weapon, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her two board members flinched, hands shooting into the air in panicked surrender. And then came the look, the instant she recognized me among the officers. Confusion gave way to fury, then to something rawer, fear. Her face twisted, and like a cornered animal, she lunged. The podium toppled as she shoved it aside and made a dash for the interior door. But Boone was faster. He stepped into her path, a wall of muscle and calm resolve. She shoved him, twisting, kicking, fighting with wiry desperation. It was useless. He caught her arm, locking her in place as she writhed and cursed. I stepped forward, pulling a pair of real handcuffs from my belt. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her world had been built on fake badges, fake laws, fake authority. Now the real thing clicked into place around her wrists. "Karen Van Fleet," I said, my voice steady. "You are under arrest for extortion, conspiracy, racketeering, criminal impersonation, and forgery of a government seal." The cuffs locked tight, the final sound of her kingdom collapsing. She spat venom, screaming about lawsuits, rights, her presidency of the HOA. She demanded recognition of her authority even as the board members shrank back, horrified by the spectacle. But her words were empty now. The queen had no crown, no court, no power left. We led her out into the night, where the flashing blue and red lights of patrol cars lit the street like a stage. Neighbors emerged from their homes, phones raised, eyes wide as they watched the woman who had terrorized them dragged in chains. For months, she had ruled Oak Street with fear, with red paper and threats of fines. Tonight, that reign ended under the glow of police lights, her clipboard clattering uselessly on the floor of her garage. The pawns were gone. The queen was captured, and the board she had ruled through fear saw her exactly as she was. Small, powerless, and defeated. But the story wasn't over. Arrest was only the beginning. Evidence had to be laid out, charges filed, and a case built airtight enough to withstand the courtroom. For Karen Van Fleet, the garage door had closed for the last time. For me, the final chapter was about to begin. The garage raid ended with Karen Van Fleet in handcuffs, her clipboard left lying on the floor like a discarded crown. But in truth, her fall that night was only the beginning of the end. The real closure would come weeks later, inside a courtroom where her empire of lies would be dismantled piece by piece, under oath on the record. The case moved quickly. It had to, there was too much evidence to ignore. The SUV full of fake badges, red notices, and cash bundles. The burner phone with texts directly from her. The storage unit overflowing with forged documents, false liens, and shell company ledgers. And the testimony of her own officers, who, after a few nights in holding, were suddenly eager to talk. The charges stacked high: impersonation of a peace officer, conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery of government documents, racketeering, extortion, and firearms violations. Each one carried years behind bars. Together, they painted the picture of a woman who had built an empire not on law, but on fear. Neighbors filled the courtroom when her trial began. Some came out of curiosity, some out of solidarity, and others because they, too, had once been her victims. They sat shoulder to shoulder, watching the woman who had dictated their lives with red slips of paper now sit silent at the defendant's table, a far cry from the smirking queen of Oak Street. The judge listened to the evidence with a stern patience. When the time came for sentencing, his words cut like steel. He called it a campaign of intimidation, a long scheme designed to bleed neighbors dry under the guise of authority. He noted the cruelty of her targeting, the elderly, the new arrivals, the families too overwhelmed to fight back. He called her actions not only criminal, but corrosive to the very idea of community. Then he delivered the sentence: 15 years in federal custody, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Restitution ordered in full. A permanent injunction barring her from any role in property management, HOAs, or boards of any kind for life. Every dollar in her shell account seized. Every lien she had filed voided. Every victim's name cleared. The sound in the room was silence first, then relief. Tears from some, nods from others. A weight had been lifted from an entire street. Restitution checks began to arrive within months. Families who had moved away were reimbursed with interest. Elderly homeowners received refunds that brought stability back to their lives. A state hotline went live, encouraging others across the county to report similar scams. 2 copycat operations in nearby towns were uncovered and dismantled within weeks. The ripple effect was spreading, and the red paper that once symbolized fear now became evidence in training manuals, teaching officers how to spot forgeries and protect communities. Back on Oak Street, life shifted. The fear was gone. No more red slips tucked under windshield wipers. No more clipboard inspections at the edge of lawns. The quiet returned, not the uneasy silence of intimidation, but the earned quiet of a street finally free. I settled into my house again. The boxes were unpacked. My grandfather's photo sat on the mantel, watching over the room with his stern eyes and knowing twinkle. He had always said rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. For months, Karen had twisted fake rules into weapons. In the end, the law, real law, had untwisted them and set things right. Duke still waved every morning, sometimes firing up his leaf blower just to make the point that the street was his again, not hers. The young family next door laughed in the yard without glancing over their shoulders. For the first time since moving in, Oak Street felt like a neighborhood instead of occupied territory. On my desk at the station, I kept one of Karen's fake badges in a sealed evidence frame. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that a badge is not just metal, or paper, or costume. It's trust. It's work. It's proof. And when that trust is mocked, when fear is used in its place, the law has a duty to answer. That's what we did on Oak Street. We answered her fear with facts, her intimidation with witnesses, her lies with truth. And truth won. Now, the quiet I bought this house for is back. Not the false quiet of intimidation, but the kind you earn. The kind that lingers after a storm passes, leaving the air clean and the ground steady again. This is my home. These are my people. And if another queen ever tries to build her kingdom on this street, she won't find a frightened neighborhood waiting to obey. She'll find me, The fence line is clear. The castle stands. And Oak Street belongs to its neighbors once again.